From healthcare to manufacturing, customer experience is important. And while there are nuances in each industry, there are some universal truths to how CX programs are executed.
Well, I think another thing that we're seeing a lot of more recently is that organizations are starting to recognize the value in having a customer-centric culture. And again, that starts at the top.
Highlighting the take-home value from our industry series on this episode of the CX Leader Podcast. The CX Leader Podcast with Steve Walker is produced by Walker, a business consulting firm that helps our clients unlock the potential of their customer experiences by placing the customer at the heart of all their business decisions. You can find out more at walkerinfo.com. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Higgins, the producer of the CX Leader Podcast, sitting in for Steve Walker. Thank you for listening. Here on the CX Leader Podcast, we explore topics and themes to help leaders like you leverage all the benefits of customer experience and help your customer and prospects want to do more business with you. For longtime listeners of the podcast, you know that we occasionally like to take a break and look back on some of the episodes to review some of the amazing advice and knowledge we've been fortunate to hear from our guests. On this episode, we're going to listen back to the take-home value segments from our industry series, where we invited CX professionals from various industries to discuss how their programs work within their company's field. This first clip is from our episode on the healthcare industry. Exactech is a healthcare manufacturing company that develops and produces bone and joint restoration products, and Robert Tangeman is their director of customer experience. Let's blow the dust off the old Wayback Machine and listen in as Robert gives Steve his tips.
Hey, Robert, is there anything else that we wanted to talk about on this episode that we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure that we got in?
I don't think so. You know, the one thing I did jot down that I thought was almost a corollary to some of the take-home feedback that we've heard from some of your prior guests would be, and it's certainly something that's helped me in my career, is as a CX leader, you have an opportunity to be a cheerleader for all the different initiatives within your business units or functional groups, regardless of whether or not they kind of stemmed from your program. And that's something that I've found that has really helped me in my career. A lot of times you'll go to a business unit, for example, and kind of highlight an opportunity for change, and they'll kind of put their hand up and say, "Oh, nope, we don't have resources, we don't have funding, we're working on X." So grab that X, whatever it is they're working on. More often than not, the customers want that too, and if you highlight and really help publicize that, even help them with the program in some extent, that can build some great goodwill for future influence, if you will. So you could kind of cash in later on, okay, now that we finished this and we're rolling into 2020, for example, I'd love it if we could get this on your roadmap and start to fund that. And by the way, I'm going to be right behind you cheering and pushing for resources on that. So that's one example that I've found super helpful. You sometimes have to be a little more patient, but it can really pay off in the long run.
Well, I was going to ask you if, for your take-home value, what was your best tip? And I guess you just gave it to us, didn't you?
That could be it for sure. Yeah.
Do you got another one you want to share?
The only other thing I would say, and I wrote this down, and part of it's maybe a thank you for Walker, right? But as you're well aware, the CX industry is absolutely great when it comes to sharing. I think as a CX leader, we need to be expecting our team members to take advantage of that from a growth and development perspective, from a career perspective. I've learned a ton through my career from your team at Walker, Steve, but also I can list off Cisco, HP, Autodesk, CXPA, which we mentioned earlier.
Yep.
So take advantage of that. It's an industry that really people love to share in. So take advantage, but also pay it forward. And that would be kind of some other take-home advice. Expect it of your team members, but then give back as well.
That's awesome. Thank you, Robert, and thank you for paying it forward today on the podcast. You've been a good friend and business colleague for a long time, and a delightful guest on the podcast. So I appreciate you being with us today.
Cloud data services are a big deal for several industries, but we decided to take a look at customer experience in the technology space. To do that, we invited James Bampos, Vice President of NetApp, a hybrid cloud data services company, and he discussed CX in a tech company. Let's fire up the Wayback Machine again to episode 61 and hear his tips and tricks for CX professionals.
We're at the point of our program that we always ask the question. We call it the take-home value question, and that is, if you have one or two pieces of advice, James, and maybe particularly for those in the technology industry and CX, what's your words of wisdom that you'd share today?
Yeah, I think, just given the conversation we just had around the complexity of B2B, I would say my success and my experience has been find a couple stakeholders in your company that really care, that are truly interested and have a passion around customer experience. In a B2B environment, there's often competitiveness going on. And so in my experience, I've found a couple stakeholders that really care, started to showcase experience, started to showcase their actions, their return on investment, their ability to scale their business based on the experience they were providing their customers. And it really took off. So one is find the stakeholders that care and leverage them and create an opportunity to market your successes. And the second thing I would say is tell stories. Don't show data without a good story. A lot of experienced professionals get into NPS charts and CSAT charts. The real value in telling your story to stakeholders is explain the data in terms of their business and how they can improve the experience, and you will get much farther along much quicker than simply showing data charts.
That is powerful advice, and as expected, I knew you'd have good advice for the people that are out there listening.
Now, before we feature our next clip, I want to invite you to connect with us. If you have a great idea for us to talk about on the CX Leader podcast, or there's a topic we haven't covered that you think would be valuable, send us an email to podcast@walkerinfo.com. We'd love to hear your ideas, or if you just want to drop us a compliment or suggestion, we love hearing those too. Either way, we're always excited to read our listeners' feedback. Now, our next clip comes from a discussion Pat Gibbons had with Matt Inman, the Global Director of Customer Experience for Johnson Controls. Matt had some great insights for CX professionals within the manufacturing space, and he offered several little pieces of take-home value in episode 62. Let's listen.
It just seems like setting the context of, before I get started, here's why we're doing it, just makes a lot of sense. So, and that actually kind of leads us right into the part of the program that we call our take-home value, and that is, in the context of our discussion today, if you were going to give a piece or two of advice to a CX leader, and let's say particularly in the manufacturing arena, what would it be?
Yeah, so it's always hard when you've been working in the space for so long to boil it down to one. So I've got three.
We'll allow that.
Okay, thank you. The first of these, and it's going to be the one that people probably hear the most common, is have a champion. And ideally, you've got your CEO that's on board, and on board not just from lip service. Get a champion that genuinely believes and is willing to go to bat. The second of these is what I just referenced on the financial linkage side. And this certainly helps being able to get the endorsement and the engagement of your organizational champion a lot easier, is when you can show them the financial linkage, because now they realize they're doing something that has been proven to be able to move the financial health of the organization forward. So that's really critical. And in my mind, you got to do it regularly. And then the last, the transparency of results. And in many respects, it's probably easier to do this now than ever. And a lot of this is because of the big, data providers that are in the industry, like the Qualtrics, whose conference we were at last week, that it's so easy to disseminate the results broadly across the organization now more than ever before. Everybody has to have that line of sight and understand where they fit into that so that everybody can be successful as an organization.
It's three really good pieces of advice from a true expert.
Our last piece of take-home value comes from our Industry Series episode where we invited Walker's own Kitty Radcliffe to talk about what she, as a CX consultant, has been seeing across several industries. We'll dial the Wayback Machine to episode 64, titled Across Industries.
Well, Kitty, thank you for being on the podcast. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to mention or you wanted to talk about on this subject? Because I'm asking you about our big closing question here.
Oh, what's that?
Well, it's kind of a hallmark of the podcast, and we insist that each guest bring us, our listeners, some take-home value. So, again, with all the things that you've talked about today, what's Kitty's one or two best tips for the CX leader out there that's kind of contemplating how they can make their program better?
Well, I've had a chance to work with a lot of different CX leaders in my time here at Walker, and I'm thinking about one in particular who has just been very effective. She's in the financial services industry, and she really, I think, a lot of the advice that I was sharing earlier, she just does that. She works in a big organization. Even though she didn't have a big staff, she's really able to have lots of influence because she does three things really well. First is keeping the CEO engaged and supportive. She's very intentional in terms of connecting the results to operational data and making sure that he understands the ROI. She's also built and inspired a cross-functional team that's committed to action. They understand the mission. They take it on enthusiastically. They communicate really well. And she's instrumental in building that overall culture in the organization. Because of that communication, everybody knows that customers are the focus. Their roles are clear. They know exactly what they're supposed to do consistently from interaction to interaction, customer to customer, across channels, and it's become part of their DNA.
That's great advice. So all of you CX leaders out there, if you can keep your CEO involved, get a good cross-functional team that represents the organization and really focus on the culture, you don't need a huge staff to do this.
Well, there you have it, CX Leader Podcast fans. Some great tips and knowledge from CX professionals in various industries. And of course, those episodes were very informative. So if you want to listen to them in their entirety, you can go to walkerinfo.com/podcasts and click on the link for the Industry Series. If you want to talk about anything you heard on this program or about how Walker can help your business's customer experience, you can contact Steve at steve.walker@walkerinformation.com or call him here in the U.S. at +1 317 843 8890. I know he'd love to hear from you. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the CX Leader Podcast. You can go to walkerinfo.com/podcasts and you'll find links to iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and our YouTube channel as well. You can go to walkerinfo.tv to listen there. Thank you for listening to the CX Leader Podcast, which is a production of Walker. We're a business consulting firm that can help you make customer experience your biggest competitive advantage. Find out more at walkerinfo.com, and we'll see you next time.